Hello, everyone. My name is Nidia Cordova, and I am the Alumni Relations Manager at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. I also lead the celebration activities in honor of CUNY Tuesday, which is today at CUNY SPS. The activities include fundraising for student scholarships and organizing this wonderful career panel discussion, which we have planned for you this evening. I would like to start by welcoming you, our amazing students, alumni, staff, faculty, foundation board members, donors, and guests to this year's CUNY Tuesday celebration at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. If you have already made a gift in support of student scholarships, thank you so much. If you would like to support the school, there is still time to do so by making a gift to the fundraising campaign of your choice. You can also become a fundraising champion by creating your own page to help us spread the word. To make a gift or for more information, please visit sps.cuny.edu/CUNY This year's CUNY Tuesday panel discussion is called Finding the Balance, Navigating the Boundaries of Your Career and Self-Care, and includes expert panelists who will offer advice on how to navigate the boundaries of self-care without jeopardizing your career goals. And we will have time for a Q&A with the panelists towards the end of the program. Now, before getting started, I just want to take a moment to thank our Office of Career Services. They have an amazing team who helped organize what promises to be a timely and important panel discussion. Just a couple of things before we get started. Please select the speaker view option on the top right corner of your Zoom screen. And please note that this event is being recorded and all attendees will receive a link afterwards. And now I would like to turn the event over to Erin Jeanette, who will be your moderator for this evening. Thank you so much, Erin, for all the important work that you do for our students and for taking the time to be with us tonight. Please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Nidia, for all that you do to keep our community connected and strong. And thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Erin Jeanette, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and I direct the student counseling service here at CUNY SPS. So I am first and foremost a therapist. I spend my day working one-on-one to help people understand themselves and make positive changes in their lives. And I do this both at CUNY SPS and in my private practice. And I also help train some future psychologists through supervision. In this most recent stage of my career, I've specialized in campus-based mental health, and I've served in roles like the one I'm in now at City College and Barnard College. But before that specialization, I worked at NYC mental health and healthcare organizations like the William Allenson White Institute, Columbia University Medical Center, and the Bellevue Hospital. And now I would love to introduce our panelists. Oh, before I move on to our panelists, some housekeeping for this evening. We're going to talk for about an hour and a half tonight. We'll be with one another. We're on Zoom, so you'll find that you'll be muted as an audience member, but you will be able to use the chat to communicate with hosts. And our team, our tech team, thank you tech team, will be helping manage this process. We have a captioner this evening, and you'll see a link in your chat to have captions if you desire. And we'll also be taking questions, as Nidia mentioned. So just post your questions in the chat. Don't be alarmed if we don't answer your question right away. We're going to gather audience questions together and address them, as many as we can, at the end. And you'll also notice throughout the evening that I will address each question that I ask to a particular panelist. This is really just to get things started and to avoid that kind of who speaks first on Zoom situation. All panelists are invited to share their thoughts about every question because we just want to get as much knowledge out there as possible. And so now I want to introduce our wonderful panelists that we've gathered together here today. This is a great group. First, I want to introduce Melissa Hines. Melissa Hines is a two-time alumnus of the CUNY School for Professional Studies. She's a registered nurse who oversees and develops curriculum, coordinates projects and implementation activities for the system transformation initiatives, and contributes healthcare knowledge across CPI activities and products. Her primary focus is to educate, train, and support the existing and emerging behavioral health workforce in clinical core competencies and integrated healthcare. In addition to her work with CPI, Ms. Hines is an adjunct lecturer and clinical instructor at CUNY's Bronx Community College. Next, I want to introduce Justine Pawlukiewicz. Dr. Pawlukiewicz is currently a professor at CUNY's NYC College of Technology in the Human Services Department. She's the former chairperson and has taught at NYU and CUNY SPS. She graduated from Syracuse University and NYU School of Social Work and CUNY SPS Disability Studies Department. And she's also a CASAC. Dr. Pawlukiewicz has presented her research articles on addictions, mental health, trauma, ethics, anxiety, and older adults. Prior to teaching, she spent 20 years supervising community-based mental health and substance use centers, interfacing with residential programs, prisons, and DWI assessment centers. Currently, she maintains a small psychotherapy practice. And finally, I'd like to introduce Sophie Pose. Sophie has spent her career working at the intersection of the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She's currently the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Mayor's Office of Community Mental Health, where her work builds the capacity of nonprofit and private sectors to promote mental health through specialized training and new service delivery strategies, and by leveraging private and public resources to foster innovation. Prior, Sophie worked as the mayor at the Mayor's Fund to advance New York City, and in the private sector doing fundraising, business development, and program management. Sophie has a master's degree in public administration from the NYU Robert F. Wagner School of Public Service and an undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College. So welcome to all our wonderful speakers, and thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule to be with us this evening. And I know it's such a treat to read your bios because it gives us all, I think, a sense of the kind of expertise that we have in the room tonight and kind of just the right folks to talk about what we're going to be exploring. Speaking of that exploring that we're going to be doing about the intersection of self-care and one's career life and kind of maintaining those goals together and making a whole picture of that. We had in our brainstorming for this event, we had an interesting experience of speaking with one another and learning from one another. And one of the things that we learned is we were talking about our shared experiences of working in the field, and Sophie brought to us some statistics that kind of corroborated all of our shared experience in the field. And we thought those statistics were so compelling that we kind of wanted to share them with you through a little poll. So Ryan, thanks to Ryan, our part of our tech team, if you could launch our first poll. We have a little quiz for our audience, two items. We want to see what you think about this. You'll see this poll in a second, folks. So answer, what % of adults in the United States experience some form of mental illness? All right. So have we posted the results? I can't see from my screen. Do we have results up? All right. So I don't know, take a look at these results and I will tell you that the correct answer is 20%. 20% of adults in the US at some point experience some form of mental illness. And I wanna, if you think about that 20%, we do the math, that's 1 in 5. And, Sophie really shared with us also that of this 20% or 1 in 5, only 4% are diagnosed with severe mental illness. So severe mental illness accounts for only a fraction of mental health challenges, but it's often severe illness that makes headlines and is portrayed in the media. This can reinforce negative stigma sometimes. What we hope to kind of convey by presenting this statistic is, I think, an experiential reality for those of us who work in the field and those of us everywhere, which is that these kinds of struggles are actually fairly common struggles. Many people encounter them in the course of a life, and a life well lived. If we could put up our next poll, that would be great. What percentage of employees want their employer to champion mental health and well-being? This gets at that intersection of folks who encounter mental health challenges, and how do they want their workplaces to be meeting these challenges or helping them to meet these challenges? All right, so our poll is ended. We've got all our answers posted. And we have the winner of the poll on screen is the correct answer. So that's 72%. 72% of employees want their employer to champion mental health and well-being. That data is from a Forbes survey. And Sophie also shared with us, as we discussed the statistic, that according to a Harvard Medical School study, employees with depression reported the equivalent of 27 lost workdays per year, 18 reflecting lost productivity, and 9 in sick or personal days. So more workers are absent from work because of stress and anxiety than because of physical illness or injury. This, I think, for those of us who work in the field, is also consistent with kind of an experiential knowledge that mental health struggles are impactful. They're impactful in every area of our lives, including our work life, and that impact is palpable, and therefore both employees and employers, I think, are invested in many cases in seeing there be work at the intersection of mental health and work life. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So with those polls, I hope that felt, I don't know, illuminating, that you learned a little bit about both mental health in the US and our workforce, our work life. Now moving into discussion, which I'm really excited for. We're going to start with this first area. We're going to talk about topic one is boundaries. Boundaries in the mental health field can be a real buzzword in discussions about the intersection of psychological health and the workplace. But boundaries can, despite the fact that we're meaning to convey something concrete, talk about boundaries can sometimes get fuzzy. So we can talk concretely about how each of you, our panelists, think about boundaries in the workplace. And Sophie, I'd love to start with you. What are some mental health pressures that you think employees experience in the workplace?
Sure. A pleasure to be here with everyone, and thank you for that wonderful opening and framing. I think we all experience the pressures that we feel in our daily life at work, but they're often further heightened because we don't have the same support systems that we may have in our home lives and among our friends. We also face the increased pressure to make a living, to move up in our career, and to have job security. So any underlying mental health challenge may feel heightened when you're sitting next to a colleague or next to your boss at work. But in particular, we know that burnout, and we'll talk more about this later, is really an occupational challenge. So burnout is something that is specific to work. It's a term that's used a lot in our popular culture to refer to sort of being tired and overloaded, but it's actually an occupational phenomenon. Another important workplace factor is discrimination. We know that discrimination can lead to both poor physical and mental health outcomes, and discrimination can show up in so many ways at work, from the way people are hired, recruited, and promoted, to the way work is assigned, you name it. And so for employees who come from a group that has a history of being socially oppressed or marginalized, we know that they may be at higher risk of mental health challenges in the workplace. And then the third big category, I think, just pertains to interpersonal dynamics and interpersonal conflict with either colleagues or a manager. And I think that you mentioned, the importance of boundaries there, but feeling like you can't necessarily advocate for yourself when you feel disrespected or undermined. Of course, this can also add to daily and potentially chronic stress.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's right, to kind of describe those pressures: burnout, discrimination, marginalization, and interpersonal dynamics. And we can all feel, I'm sure everyone who's been in a job can relate to when one has felt those pressures kind of on their mind or in their heart or in their gut, wherever they sit for each of us. Given those kinds of pressures and how they can feel the heaviness of them. Justine, maybe we could move to you. I'm curious about some boundaries that you think it's essential for an employee to maintain in order to reduce or offset some of those workplace pressures.
Well, I think some of the boundaries, sometimes we're first to maybe think about disclosing all of our symptoms and everything that's going on. And I think you need to couch it. You're not at home. These are not your friends. This is not your doctor. This might be your supervisor, but I think there's still enough boundaries so that if there is some stress going on in the workplace or some burnout, that you can speak about it by using much more words that are related to, let's say, burnout. I feel I'm overloaded and I can't finish some of my work, rather than saying I have an anxiety disorder and it's ruling me and I can't, get past it. So I think there's some boundaries where you don't need to disclose the symptoms. You need to kind of think about, if you're going to advocate for yourself, I didn't get my work done, or this, something's got in the way. Not that they're lying, but it is certain other things that are work related that you could use to explain how you're feeling about, the workload.
That's really interesting. What you're describing is kind of almost a boundary of privacy for oneself, a boundary that says, this is my private sense of what's going on, but there are ways to articulate that experience, that private experience, in terms that feel workplace appropriate, because they're directly related to work product. That's a really interesting idea.
I just want to add, if you don't, what happens is then all that information the supervisor or the coworkers take in, and then there becomes the judgment. Is this a good reason or not? Oh, or do I feel pity, or do I feel sympathy, or do I feel empathy? All of these emotions start coming out with all the coworkers. And then what happens, it can backfire, because someone then can say, oh, you so-and-so had to deal with, whatever, their anxiety or their depression, but me, I have, childcare issues, and that's not important enough for me to get a pass. So it comes back to bite you if you give too much information.
Mm-hmm. So
or
really,
the supervisor will say, you really need to take care of that. You're using, that's too much. That's, you're so anxious, you're this, and then becomes the supervisor, coworkers then start telling you what to do with your condition or your symptoms, and that's not the arena for it.
So really stressing that privacy boundary, and the way I'm hearing you describe it is as an act of self-care and self-respect, rather than an act of that comes from a place of shame. It's not from a place of, I can't tell people this. It comes from a place of advocacy, of wanting to be effective in the workplace and have people understand how it relates to the work product, and not backfire in terms of you've overrun your own privacy boundaries.
It's a professional response, not a personal one.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, that's a nice way to tie it with the bow. Melissa, I'm really, because we are in this space, right, where there are personal experiences, and how to translate them into this public or fairly public arena that is the workplace, semi-public arena that is the workplace. Curious, there are all these little moments that aren't so little about when we negotiate space for ourselves, like vacation, time off, negotiating workload, work boundaries. How does one stop apologizing for making requests about vacation, time off, doctor's appointments? And what boundaries does one assert as non-negotiable? How do you discuss those boundaries without, say, jeopardizing a promotion or a performance about it? That's a big question, so maybe we can take it piece by piece, but.
Okay, well, I think I'd start with some of the things that I always consider, and this is personal and professional, right? I usually consider 4 things. So I know my limits, right? Because when I know my limits, then it's easier to collaborate with other people and say, this is the limit, and maybe we need to, work together to prioritize. paying attention to my feelings, like, do I feel comfortable in this situation? Or do I feel, maybe disrespected? There's lots of things. How are my feelings being put into this situation as well? Because we are human, we have feelings. And then I give myself permission to set those boundaries, regardless of what it is. Yes, I'm willing to do this, but as up to this point. Because again, when we don't set boundaries, it can definitely cause us to have burnout. We feel overwhelmed, and then you just don't want to do it, or you do it in a really half-hearted sort of a way. And then I consider my environment. So where am I? Am I at work? Am I at home? Am I talking to my family, where it's easier to be a little more free with what I'm saying, as opposed to my supervisor, where you can't say, no, I just really don't want to do that. So finding ways to articulate the point. So for me, one of the things that's always important is setting those goals and priorities for myself, and then deciding what it is that I'm going to do next. So decide what must get done now and what can wait. So learning to say no was one of those things for me that was really hard initially, but then I had to practice it a lot. And so that's something, that was really helpful to me, learning to say no, not in a mean way, but learning to say no to new tasks. If I start feeling like I can't take it on because it's just going to be too much, evaluating if I have the desire and the bandwidth, because again, sometimes I get it. You can't say no to a task, but if you have the ability to say no, maybe you want to say no. And to help with the request. And so if I don't have the bandwidth, but I am willing to help you out a little bit, if you want me to review it or something like that, yes, those are things that I can do. And then there are times you won't be able to turn something down, but if you can't, then really being straightforward with, what I am able to do. So, I think a lot of the times when people are having conversations, they try to have like these lightweight reasons because they just really don't want to get to the point. No, it's sometimes just better to get to the point and get your point across, because if you don't, you seem disingenuous. People can battle your reasons aside, or they can try to persuade you into doing something you really just don't want to do. So to limit my frustration into the frustrations of others, it's just being candid about what you're saying no about. If they're challenging you, stay clear and steady on my message. And again, learning to say no and really practicing it. For lots of people, saying no is hard, but saying it out loud, and it eventually becomes easier. You feel bolder to say no, and then you don't feel so bad. And the thing about it is, especially when you're talking about, say, things like sick time and vacation time and personal days, those are your days. You've worked for those things. And I think just the heightened stress that most people had even before COVID and now with COVID, you really do need to be using that time effectively. There's various reasons. Yes, maybe it is a mental health day. Lots of people need them. And that is a very valid reason to not come to work today. I think for so many of us, when COVID kind of happened, it was just like, oh my gosh, I have to work, and I have to work hard because my job security and all of these things, like Sophie said, just lots of people felt really uncertain. But again, you too are human and you have limits, and you need to take that time. When you go to the doctor, it's for the benefit of your organization or the agency that you're with. If you are not well, you cannot do your job. So it's not something to be apologetic about. It's something that you really need to stand up for. And so I think anything my colleagues will tell you, I always tell them, please go to the doctor, please do these things, because again, when you are sick, like Justine says, it impacts everyone. It's not just me that's impacted, it's everyone. So it's better that you do your annual checks. It's better that you figure out how you're going to take a vacation. It's better that you do those things, because when you do come back, I feel like we can collaborate, and it's not something to apologize for. And one of the things that I know I definitely don't do is I don't apologize when I do write those emails to my supervisor. I don't start off in an apology. I'm really sorry. I usually say, I will be taking these days off. Please let me know if that is okay. Because again, I do know there are other people where I work and there may be conflicts. but it's not, for me, really, at the end of the day, it's really not a request. I need that time. That's the reason I've specified these days. And I don't need to tell you why I'm taking this time, because that's another thing people like to do. Let's give you a reason for why I'm taking this. Nobody needs to know why you're taking that time. It is your time. And so and again, this is something that I had to learn. I had some really good mentors to help me learn to say no, set boundaries, and not feel bad about doing either, for my own personal, well-being and mental health.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think everyone actually who's spoken so far, I think has highlighted the ways that sometimes I think when there's a struggle around the feeling of legitimacy in taking that sick day, or there's this intense pressure that maybe if I share more, maybe if I disclose more information about what is happening for me in my experience, maybe that will convince, say, a supervisor that my request is legitimate. Meanwhile, the request is already legitimate, and one does not need to override a privacy boundary in order to get legitimacy for a request. So, and what I'm appreciating about all of the responses that you folks have given so far is that I think that they also rely on like that moment of internal clarity of like Melissa, I think you stressed it, I think most kind of clearly about knowing in yourself where your limit is before you head into one of those conversations. So you've got that nice, strong foundation to stand on and know how to communicate. This question is for everyone, and it's about this. Oh, Justine, yeah, please.
Yeah, I want to underscore what Melissa was saying, because she's saying, don't come off as needy, or you come off as you're assertive, you're yourself when you're asking for these things. And like, I never, when I was the supervisor and they would call me up and say, I'm taking a mental health day, that would drive me crazy. I would rather, this is what I do. When I want a mental health day or whatever, I say, I'm calling in for a sick day. They don't have to know what it is, right? But I'm not lying. I'm calling to use one of my sick days. So that's it. And so I think that these boundaries and not disclosing so much to when you want those days off. And also I think you need to understand what's the rules on days off, because a lot of places have 2 people can't take off on the same time, the coverage, you can only take one week off in the summer. So you also need to know what are those days and how you're going to use them, so that if you were up all night, and you couldn't get to sleep and you need that day, hey, I'm using a sick day. Hey, I'm using a personal day. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point. And I think we're going to be able to circle back to it in the latter part of this discussion, but it's also about organizational boundaries, that if an organization isn't clear about its rules and boundaries, who can take time off when, what it's for, coverage, et cetera, it makes it very hard for an employee to then make their own clear boundaries within that system. So boundaries is a two-sided enterprise, and it helps for all of it to be clear. And this kind of gets to our last question, which I will invite Sophie to start, but please, at this point on topic on boundaries, please share all your perspectives. We've already kind of hit on it. Should setting your boundaries be a subtle gesture? Sophie, we can start with you, but I want everyone's perspective on this.
I think Melissa really eloquently spoke to this in her response. I would say setting boundaries should be something that happens early and often. And so the answer is no, it shouldn't be a subtle gesture. I think setting boundaries before they become necessary is a great practice. So that when you do set that boundary, it's not confrontational, as Melissa was saying, like it's not apologetic, but that it's just the way it is, and the more you can consistently enforce that boundary, whether you're having a great day or a bad day, the easier I think actually it is for your colleagues and your managers to work with you and to plan around that boundary, or to plan around what you're contributing to the office. I know as a manager, I don't mind people establishing their boundaries. I don't mind a sick day, and I really appreciate it when I know what to expect, because it means that timelines and workflow can be organized. And so that early and often, I think is the communication best practice that you can really keep in mind when you're thinking about boundaries. And I think to the extent that you're comfortable doing so, problem solving around the boundary is also, I think, can be appropriate. You know, I don't think you should be bending over backwards, but if you have a boundary, if you have, let's say, a child like I do who's young and you have to clock out at 5 or 5:30, but you also have a big deadline the next day, you know, how are you going to problem solve with your colleagues and your managers to make sure that the priority gets met? So I think when you establish those boundaries consistently, people know what to expect, but there's also a certain level of flexibility that you can offer people and creativity to make sure that you're not putting people out, you know, by doing so.
Yeah. So other perspectives about the subtle gesture or not of boundary setting. I think you've conveyed a sense of it, but I want to make sure I get final thoughts in there from boundaries.
Well, I would just add, I agree. You know, I think you should be very clear and consistent and confident in what it is that you're doing. And I think, you know, subtlety can be hard, right? Because people's subtlety can vary. So it's not easy all the time to recognize other people's boundaries because they can be subtle, or their facial gestures may be saying one thing, but their words, like, so sometimes you cannot pick up on those cues that people are giving you that they may feel uncomfortable. So it is important to set those boundaries. And so for me, I see that if I'm willing to set boundaries with you, it means I respect you enough to say that this is how we are going to be optimized together. This is how we're going to work well together. I'm telling you what my boundaries are. Please tell me what yours are. Because again, I don't want to offend you, and I don't, you know, I prefer you don't offend me either, right? And so I'm usually very clear about that. So for example, you know, within this year, yes, there are lots of changes that kind of happened for me, you know, personally and professionally. And it was changing positions and all of these things. And even in that change, it was really important for me to consistently keep my boundaries established, because though this was a new position, there were new work demands, I really wanted to be clear about what it is I was going to take on and how I'd be effectively doing that. So for example, lots of my colleagues, they like to work over the weekend. I am not working over the weekend. I work Monday through Friday. You know, I'm willing to come in early. I'm willing to stay a little later, but my weekends are my weekends. And so I'm very clear about that. Sometimes they want to email at 2 a.m. That's fantastic. I'm happy that you're emailing at 2 a.m. I will not be emailing you until, you know, I log in for the day. And it really just not stepping back or coming back on my own like boundary and doing it anyway. No, even if it's something that I'm like, oh, I should, no, I'm not answering it. Unless the building is on fire, I am not answering it because it can wait until Monday. And honestly, when I first started, I didn't have these boundaries. I would answer all the time. I would pick up the phone. I was doing all these things. And I was very unhappy. Was I unhappy with my job? No, I was unhappy with the behaviors that I was allowing people to do because I wanted to be successful, but I really wasn't being successful because I couldn't set, you know, clear boundaries that, you know, other people could like build upon too.
Yeah. Well, that moves us very nicely, I think, because we're starting to into our next topic area, which is the topic area of burnout. And sometimes the kind of erosion, I think, of both boundaries and of workplace safety in terms of some of those discriminatory factors, experiences of marginalization and oppression, that those things together can often lead to experiences of burnout. So Melissa, coming back to you, let's talk about safety in the workplace. What are some experiences that can erode an employee's sense of safety in the workplace? And what might an employee do to access and protect their safety?
I think this last couple months, I mean, I think it's been a long time coming, but the last couple of years, you know, there's just been a lot of social unrest and lots of focus on, you know, just inequality that we're seeing around us. And, you know, I think one of the things that happened to lots of, you know, BIPOC individuals were their colleagues coming to them to be the source of knowledge. And that really can become a very unsafe, very emotionally unsafe, I should say, sort of a situation, because they're being expected to to kind of support their emotional, feelings and your own in a way that, you're feeling comfortable. And that can really be hard. And so sometimes, it's the ways that a workplace may be that it can make it really hard to do that, because if you can't feel secure about your thoughts or ideas, freely being able to express yourself without worrying about potentially opening up yourself for negative, reactions, or people feeling like you're attacking them, and I think that's one of the things that was really eye-opening the last couple of months, was like this emotional safety that lots of people were really trying to figure out in their workplace. How could I communicate with my colleagues, letting them know some of the experiences that they were going through without making them feel bad, but also letting them understand some of the ways that you may have felt bad or may have, felt certain things up until this point. And, again, having that empathy is important, because I think people sometimes forget to be empathetic to others. True, you don't understand, but you need to be empathetic. And when that happens, then people can really talk to you and understand things and share, right? Especially with coworkers, when your social interactions are very different, because of course, I'm sure we all have very different tiers of relationships with our colleagues. There's those colleagues that you really talk to, you may, hang out with a little bit. There's those colleagues that you work with really on a less frequent basis, but you really want to be able to be fair to all of your colleagues. And so being empathetic was one of the things I think it's super important, and helping the folks around you and yourself know what resources are available to you. I think, again, lots of the social unrest helped us to determine we really don't know what these resources are in our organization. And I mean, we are a mental health organization. How do we not know what these resources are? So who can you talk to if you feel like there's been bias against you? How do you, speak up if there's a microaggression? How do you, as a unit, establish ground rules for communication? None of these things were there established. So we had to do that.
Yeah.
The last year or two.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I love this, because I think it's going to circle us back to our topic area that we're going to cover in a little bit about organizational care and system care, and the way that systems can work to support employees too. We're talking now about kind of the emotional weight of a workplace, and unevenly carried, I think, burdens of that weight at times, which can in turn lead to burnout. Sophie, tell us a little bit about like the practicalities of burnout. Like, what is it? How do we recognize it?
Sure. So the World Health Organization in 2019, as I alluded to earlier, named burnout an occupational challenge. So again, a mental health condition that is related to work. And actually, of note, in a survey, about 66% of full-time workers reporting feeling burned out some of the time. And so I think, to Erin's sort of opening points about sort of the prevalence of mental health challenges in the workplace and in our society, burnout is absolutely no different. And so earlier, I also mentioned that burnout is often characterized as being overloaded or having too much work, but research points that it's actually driven by 6 drivers, one of which is work overload. And so these drivers include lack of control, right? Not having autonomy or really knowing why or what you're working on. Insufficient rewards, and these can be financial or social, right? I think we all want to be paid more, or many of us may want to be paid more, but a reward can also be a social reward, right? Feeling appreciated and celebrated at work. Lack of community, so lack of social support at work, lack of not feeling like you belong with your coworkers and among your peers. Lack of fairness, so this comes back to the point about discrimination and bias in the workplace affecting mental health. Conflict of values, so feeling like the work that you're doing is really in conflict to your personal and moral values. So I think a classic example would be a vegetarian working in a meatpacking plant, right? That is a very clear conflict of values. And then finally, work overload. And so unlike stress, which is often characterized by sort of over engagement and sort of like buzzing around and a lot of sort of hyperactive energy, burnout is actually more related with disengagement. So feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion, increased mental distance from work, feeling really negative or hopeless about the work that you're doing day to day, and then reduced efficacy at work. And so I think the easiest way to spot burnout and actually to spot mental health challenges in general, and I think all the clinicians on the line can probably speak to this better than I can, is really looking at a change in baseline behavior. So if I, for the last 12 months, was showing up to work like an eager beaver, really like diving into every project, really enthusiastic, and over time or even suddenly, I start to have a really sort of detached, more cynical attitude, that could be the result of burnout, right? For any of the 6 sort of reasons that I outlined. And so, yeah, I'd say that that's sort of like the formal, practical definition of burnout as put out by the WHO and others.
Thank you. It's really helpful. And, I think it's interesting that there are sometimes workplaces where a number of employees might describe themselves as feeling burnt out or might be showing signs of burnout, but there's also something isolating about the experience, no matter how many people are going through it. Justine, speaking to that idea of feeling alone in burnout, how might an employee, or should an employee, let's phrase this question in an open way, but might an employee raise the topic of burnout with a supervisor or colleagues? Is there a way to do this safely and well? What do you thoughts?
I mean, I don't think, yes, I don't think you have to say, oh, I'm so burnt out, but I think there is a way to bring it up with the supervisor in terms of, let's say the workload is too much. And you're feeling burnt out, the workload is too much, you're not enjoying it. I think that there's a way to talk to the supervisor about what's on their plate and what can we negotiate. Maybe there can be some changes, or if you're going to give me more work, what are you going to take away? So I think sometimes when we go into a work atmosphere, we don't know what we're going to get that we're going to wind up being stressed out about, or what boundaries we want to keep. Maybe we don't know that. We realize that we're going to have to travel at work. I'm going to have to go over a bridge, and maybe we have a phobia of bridges, So I think we need to kind of, you can bring up it. Sometimes it's better to bring it up with other coworkers as well. But the one thing that happens is that the supervisor has a role, and the supervisor has things that has to get done, right? So they have pressure on that end. And then what's happening is their workers are saying, we're too overwhelmed, or I can't do this, or I have this, thing going on, that's in my way. The supervisor is like thinking, okay, I'm a human being, but I'm also managerial. So you have to understand that dynamic, so that when bringing it up to a supervisor, it's more about, I think I need some kind of change. I think I'm feeling, my activity is low. And so if there can be some kind of change. The other thing is that you can seek support from other coworkers who might be feeling the same way as you, but it's not ganging up on the supervisor or the institution, because that's just not going to be a helpful position for anybody to be in. There's also things, some places have a wellness program. Sometimes they encourage their employees to go get those physical activities, or to go exercise. Or I've seen places that shut down for one day, and the whole day is all about working on oneself and interacting, with each other. The cohesiveness, the teamwork gets better. So that, not a lot of places can afford to just, take a day off and have, what they call like, working wellness day. But definitely helping your body, getting exercise, sleep, and mindfulness. Mindfulness is really important. Just staying focused in what you're doing and not all the other things that one might be bringing up. So I don't think people need to be subtle about it, but I think people need to showcase what it is and bring the change that you may want to talk about, and let's work it together. Sometimes the supervisor may say, there's nothing I can do about that. You're just going to have to deal with it. And, and then you feel like you want to start telling, your supervisor, well, how this job is, but sometimes, I also feel that after being a supervisor, I also realize that everybody has a different level of work and how much work they can do. And that hopefully, your supervisor knows whether you're a 10, an 8, or 5. Okay, if you're below a 5, then maybe you shouldn't be employed. But I had different levels. So I had to work with different levels of people and personalities. So what I could expect from one, I couldn't expect from the other. And that has to be realistic. So those supervisors out there, I think you kind of take a heed at that. Everybody doesn't have to have, this 10 projects. Sometimes it's better to give 5 to somebody that can do a bang up job. When if you give them 10, they're not going to give you anything.
Mm-hmm. I hear in there the sensibility of a supervisor in the sense that there's like, it's pragmatic, helpful ways about thinking about the way a supervisor, what they have to manage in their job. But also I hear some like respect for differing offerings in the workplace. Some people are kind of quantity masters, and some people don't produce as much quantity, but have a really, really quite subtle and beautiful quality to their work. And there's an art to supervising in a way that respects those things. And because we're in this department of kind of self-care and valuing qualities, like, let's talk about self-care a little bit. That's another buzzword. Often we hear about the sleep and the healthy diet and the exercise and all the things, the time with friends, the things we're all supposed to be doing to be healthy and well. And sometimes folks know these things. They know the care that they would like to do, but aren't sure how to make it happen in their everyday lives. Melissa, I'm curious, what are the biggest challenges in your thinking about implementing self-care activities at the workplace, and how might an employee discuss self-care with a boss?
I think one of the hardest things is feeling like you deserve that. I think lots of the times people are like, oh, I don't want to ask for this thing because there's so many other things. I don't know if I deserve this thing. But I think one of the things the last couple of months have really been helpful for is just lots of ideas, outside of the box ideas that lots of organizations have been doing. And so being in a healthcare setting, some of these ideas can't happen here, but there are lots of other things that can. And so, one of the things that I really appreciated, one of the suggestions that I heard and I really appreciated was after 3 o'clock, except for today, of course, I usually do not put my camera on. I've gotten camera fatigue. There's no more camera for the day. And I really also try, if I can, not to have meetings at that point, just because I think between being on a camera and all the other work that I have to do, I'm tired and I'm just not at my best at 3 o'clock to really want to engage with you in this way. So let me focus on the things that I do need to complete for the day. And then tomorrow, I'll be fresh and ready for whatever it is that you want to do. Another thing is usually trying to end meetings about 15 minutes to the hour. So I can go to the bathroom. I can have a drink of water, things like that. Even scheduling lunch into my calendar. True, sometimes I'm bad and I don't actually eat lunch at that time, but at least I've placed it on the calendar. And lots of people on my team will tell you I am the worst when it comes to lunch. I am an advocate for lunch. I will tell them go eat lunch. Myself, not so much. So, I think it's even those things. It's just really scheduling certain things for yourself throughout your day so you can care for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Do you really need to have a meeting and I say that because they love to have 8 o'clock meetings and 8:30 meetings. Do you really need to have an 8:30 meeting? No, probably not. But, whatever you can do to not schedule those, really being mindful of the things around you and the people around you. Because again, I think one of the things that's hard, again, is saying, I don't really want to do that, or I don't agree with this, this meeting or all of these meetings, but really kind of advocating for yourself. And so one of the things that I really had to do with my own supervisor is keeping it on my agenda. So every week when we have supervision, I bring up different things. She knows what's going on with my team and she knows what's going on with me. So she can never say she does not know what's happening. Why? Because it's advocating, right? It's advocating for other people's self-care. But if she's in agreement with that, then it also benefits me. So yes, can we not have meetings go all the way to the hour? Can we stop, 10, 15 minutes in it before? Can we not have meetings after this time? And if we do need to have it, what is the expectations and things like that. So those were some of the things that were really important, I know, for me and my team during this time. And also like communicating outside of email. So we have group chat, not on our phones, but on Teams. So we ping each other. So we don't actually have to be, have 12,000 emails. Everyone gets the same message at one time, which is really nice. And things like that. And it also makes us feel more connected to each other, which was something that I think we didn't really do before, just be normal. Everything was so formal. And now we're like, okay, good morning. And everybody has whatever funny greeting. It's just really humanizing, us as people at work with our own problems.
Yeah, what's coming through to me, Melissa, in what you're saying is really this robust use of structure in order to manage. So, like there are all kinds of structural tools, about the way one uses time, the way one uses office computing tools like Teams. These are all things that feel really officey but in fact they're being marshaled for this purpose that is about feeling good. And there's something so lovely about marshaling structural tools to feel well. And Justine, I'm curious. So it's wonderful when these things go well to see all the structure fall into place to support folks. We do know that sometimes people have experiences that aren't positive. How might one cope when one's experience of advocating for mental health in the workplace is not so positive?
Okay, I think you have to think about, was it realistic in terms of, is it something that that you don't want to do, or it's going to interfere in your own, mental health well-being? So what is the level of that is one issue. And also, what did you ask for? That is it part of the law? You have to kind of begin to think about it. Is there something in there that you should be entitled to, or some kind of accommodation? For people who have physical and developmental issues, that's become very clear, and we've got techniques, we've got equipment. But for mental health and wellness, it really isn't there. It's still on that thing of, you don't want to tell people, your mental health issues or your personal family issues, because a lot of these are family, children issues, couples having problems, everything, physical problems, so stressors, so financial. So you don't want to disclose all of that stuff, but you do want to begin to think about taking care of yourself in some way. So I think that if you feel that it's something that's a real violation, then I think you might need to go to your HR and figure out, is that something that I should have been accommodated for, or should I be accommodated for in the future? Like I gave you the example of the person not wanting to travel over a bridge, and maybe they have to do visits or go to different agencies or whatever. And you didn't know that when you first began the job. That's why I say that sometimes these things come as the job comes along. You realize, I want to keep a boundary there. I don't want to do that, or that's going to interfere with my mental health. They come as they go, as you go along, or sometimes I've had someone say, I really can't go to this or do this, whatever. It's personal, and there's a reason. And I respect that. And then I could kind of maneuver around that. So I think that when there is something that could be valid, I think it really needs to be looked at. Could it be adjusted in some way in that person's workplace? But if it's something that's really violating, then I think HR needs to get in, because let's say it is, I can't do this or I can't do that. But then what happens is HR will say, well, then what else can we give that person to make it all equal? So the equality will come through.
We're moving into an interesting space of that is about the larger environment. And I mean, we kind of have been talking about the larger environment of work and kind of the larger structure of the workplace for a while. But I think now to make it more kind of explicit. I think an interesting feature of discussions about employee well-being is that they can sometimes collapse in some unhelpful ways. They can start to sound like it's kind of employees against employers, like the employees want wellness and employers want to not have an unwell workforce. And second, it can sometimes send a message. Discussions about self-care can sometimes send the message that the onus is on the employee. It's called self-care after all. It's like, take care of that outside of work time. Don't bring it in here. Meanwhile, the real picture is that I think many employers are trying to create healthy workplaces, are really interested in doing this, and to help employees have access to mental health resources. So let's talk about the pieces of employee mental health that aren't about self-care and that are about community and organizational care, the way workplaces come together to care for one another. Sophie, I'm curious how an employee might advocate for self-care as community care. So like care of an office or an organization, more than the accommodation of individual needs. How might a team work together to create a healthy work environment?
Absolutely. So I think thinking about the business case for self-care and sort of speaking the language of your employers, like most basic bottom line is one way to start. So I'm like keep bringing in like research to, because I'm not a clinician, right? So that's what I know. But we know that when employees feel good and have their emotional and physical health needs met, that they are more productive, that they stay in their jobs for longer, and that they have better morale. In many cases these days, promoting self-care and sort of wellness services in the workplace is also a really great tool for recruiting talent. And so to the extent that the employee can frame, or the team can frame these needs and this reality in sort of like a business case that communicates the organizational value outside of the value to the individual, that can be a persuasive tool. I do think for many people, like pursuing individual well-being is a lofty and wonderful goal, but if it's not, you can try a business case. I think zooming down a little bit to sort of your question about the team and how you can create a culture that prioritizes this work, I think it's about modeling, and I think Justine earlier spoke about sort of this dual role that managers play in balancing leadership priorities with the needs of their workers. And so my perspective is that managers and workplaces play an incredibly important role in all of this, both practically speaking in terms of like how they actually meet the needs of their employees, but how they model. So everything we've talked about self-care ideally would be modeled by a manager, because that makes others in the workplace feel comfortable, right? Honoring those boundaries, taking their time. On a team level, I think creating space to talk about personal experiences to the extent that people want to do that is great. You know, I think Justine also spoke about disclosure and the importance of privacy. You know, I think for some people that's really important. I know that for others, particularly folks that are coming up in the workforce today, open dialogue about mental health at work feels good and feels needed and warranted. And so creating a space where people can share their experiences however they want to share them is important. And I just want to sort of put a pin in that and say, like, you should never pressure people to share how they're feeling, but creating the space for people to do so is important. I think I spoke a little bit about this earlier, but the importance of peer and social support. And so that doesn't mean you have to have a best friend at work, but it could mean, you know, joining an employee resource group. You know, these are typically groups that are focused on a certain identity. So parents in the workplace, or, you know, AAPI members of the workplace, you name it. A lot of organizations have these, and if they don't, you can start one. It doesn't have to be formally sanctioned by your employer. Other employers have like buddy systems, which I know my office started during the pandemic and which were particularly nice given the remote working conditions. And then I think about, and I like the final thing is just thinking about resilience and coping skills. And so we talked a little bit about coping. You know, resilience is something that we can all foster in ourselves and we can foster in each other. Resilience doesn't have to emerge in response to trauma. Like, you can be someone who's had a positive life experience and still be resilient. I think sometimes it's framed as sort of an opposite response to a negative experience. And I think for me, you know, and from what I've read, resilience is really about giving people a sense of control. So understanding what they can and they can't control, and sort of building comfort with uncertainty. Thinking about how you get people excited about what the work they're doing. So I'm not going to be excited about every aspect of my job, certainly, but thinking about how you give people projects that are stimulating and meaningful to them can increase that sense of purpose and increase that sort of sense of positivity in the workplace, which can boost morale. And then the final thing is really thinking about just commitment, right, to the work and to each other in the workplace, so that people do feel like they belong, like they're safe, and that they have that sort of security, which we know is so important to feeling emotionally well. So those would be my suggestions to get started.
Thank you. Justine, how we're talking about this workplace that maybe helps foster wellness, how might one find a workplace that prioritizes the well-being of its employees? During an interview process, how can a potential employee identify an organization that cares about the mental health of its employees?
I think there's a number of questions. You know, besides, you know, we want to know what the time off is and the benefits and the vacation, right? All of that. But again, you would ask, what's the rules? Because maybe you go to visit your mom on her birthday in August and you may not get that. So you want to know those rules as well. The other thing I always suggest to ask is on an interview is if your place had a wish list of things to change, what would that look like, you know? Because from the wish list, you'll get some of the things that are still undone, and you'll get a better perspective of where they're at in some of their goals, or whether they can't even reach their goals, sometimes due to funding, as which we always notice. Also, I always ask, what is, you know, of course, what's the best thing you like this job? Or what is the thing you don't really like about this job? What's the one things you want to take away that you wish you didn't have to do? You know, like people ask me that. And when I would interview them and they'd ask me that question, I'd say the paperwork is horrendous. And if you're not type A personality and got to hurry up, you might feel like people here feel like they're behind the 8 ball, even though they're great counselors, but they don't get their work done. So, you know, and, you know, because I always ask, you know, how's your work ethic? How's your productivity? Everybody says wonderful. And then they come to work at where I worked in my agency and they need to quit because of the amount of paperwork. So you want to know, and you want to take whatever they say, take it to heart. Because if I say paperwork, you know, I'm different than Melissa. I don't stop working. It just keeps going and going because the paperwork doesn't stop. I have that kind of job. It just doesn't stop. So, so I think that's important to find out. And the other thing, you know, what are all those responsibilities? And then you might bring up, like, what is it that you do for self-care here, or to bring the team together? Or do you have things that you socialize together? What do you do? You know, in that way, some people have lunch together. Some people have a meeting, a rap session. Some people, like we said, parent group. Some people go for a walk for 10 minutes with each other, you know, just walk in the building. So what kind, and you also want to maybe ask even the supervisor, well, what kind of self-care do you do for this job and others that are in this job as well? Can you give me some ideas? And if I was to get burnt out, why do you think I would get burnt out in this job? You know, because then you're going to hear all the issues that you want to know if this is the place for you or not. And sometimes it might be because even though they have a lot of problems, and I've worked everywhere, they've had a lot of problems and no money, and still love the job and work damn hard and with no rest. But what can I say? But I just want to say, I'm a little different. I work constantly, but then I take my breaks. And I think that for everybody, you know, you can find your self-care. I hate to say it, but sometimes I just got to watch TV for an hour and I go, okay, that's it. Too bad. You know, so I got to go lay on my bed for a half hour. You know, I work from home. Okay. So that's what happens. So and then I also tell myself every day, because I wake up and I go, boy, you didn't do anything and it's 10 o'clock. And then I say, you did this, you did your emails, you sent this person that, you fixed this document. And then I'm like, well, I guess I did do a lot by 10 o'clock. So I always look for self-care as what did I do? I make that list all day long that shows me I did a lot.
Yeah. You're highlighting the clarity also that you have about your personal style. Like you were just able to define very clearly what your work style is, what makes you feel good, and like the internal clarity that it takes to practice that self-care. That's something that you do in you in order to bring that clarity to the workplace. Speaking of finding that workplace, Melissa, I do really want you to weigh in on this topic too, because I think it's important about identifying the good and the tricky about a potential employer. So I would love to ask, like in an interview experience, how does one get a sense of the ways the employer supports mental health, or maybe spot any red flags? To be, Justine, I think you got at this too. What should one be listening for?
I think it's, as someone who interviews, I like to ask the question and see what people do or do not say. Because I've asked the question. Did you answer my question? Or did you not answer my question? Did you circumvent the question? Well, if you circumvented my question, I'm definitely concerned, right? Because I've asked a very clear question. What does this organization provide in regards to X, Y, and Z? And I think depending on the organization, those things really need to be explicit. So I think especially when you're in healthcare, you should have some really good benefits when it comes to mental health. Those are things that should be clear. People should be able to tap into that, especially when you're in a caring environment. Yes, you will get burnt out, and you get burnt out regularly. There are times where you really do need to find someone to talk to. How do you decompress? Just like Justine said, yeah, how do you just decompress here? Am I able to step away for a certain period of time, things like that. That's always a red flag. If I ask a question and they don't give me an answer,
right?
I know there's something waiting for me if I did decide, to join this team. But then I like to ask people like how long they've been there, because that to me is also an indicator. How long have you been here, and what is your job? Like, what do you do here? Because that tells me a lot too. Sometimes I do like when organizations have like team type interviews, because that's really tends to be well-rounded, right? You have different people who do different jobs at different levels asking questions. So if you have someone who's in an administrative role, who's very much a part of this team, this does tell me that this is a collaborative organization, right? Because two reasons that people often leave is supervisor and culture. So if they have a culture where it's fairly hierarchical, I don't want to be there, right? Because it's like, you're not important because you're this, and you're not as valued in a team. And okay, well, that's your supervisor. How do you two interact? Looking at those facial cues, because again, like I don't want to say, but like they're not so, and I think those are the things that are super important for me. Like, what does this organization do? One of the ones I also like to ask is like, in 6 months, in a year, what are some of the things I can be expected to learn or grow towards? What are some of the things that I can, work at in this organization? Because sometimes you do have really good ideas. Like, my old organization, they had this really good, I don't know, whatever it is. They had Reiki and this and that. Is that something that would be, you'd consider here? Because again, you do have your wealth of experience, you do have ideas, and are they receptive to the ideas as a new person coming in? I think those are always the red flags for me. If they're like, yeah, this is how we do it here, and we're never changing, you're going to come and you're going to go, and the same ship you entered will be the same ship that you've left on. And so you may not want that. But if they seem like they are willing to change and they are willing to collaborate with an employee, I think those are always really good organizations to be a part of, or departments or whatever it is, like, or in a department, not an organization so much.
Right. Wow. We have some really, we have a lovely question that's come in from our audience member. So I'd love to turn to some audience questions now. This is kind of a two-parter. So I'm going to ask the first part first, and we'll move on. In your organizations and your organizational experiences, have you seen the culture and morale at your organizations or companies change as you've become more inclusive of wellness? So that's the first part. And the second part is, and what recommendations would you give to organizations or companies that are still experiencing challenges and becoming more wellness oriented? So why don't we start with that first part about the companies or organizations that have managed to put more in place with regard to this? Have you seen a culture and morale change?
Yeah, I have. And you may be some of you may be part of this. I'm part of the Cognito thing. I work for CUNY, right? So what CUNY has finally decided to do is to teach faculty and staff how to talk to students who might be in distress, who might have mental health issues and whatever. So for the first time, and I'm on this behavioral intervention team as well, where we look at every student who might have had a crisis that month. And we could never really teach faculty and staff because there was that oh, no, we're not going to talk about mental health. Finally, we get to talk about mental health. So what's happened is that faculty and staff take this 39-minute simulation workshop on best practices on how to deal with mental health issues. But also the great thing about it is they themselves get to hear that and hear the right answer. So you're also not only working on your own mental health, and also thinking, well, how can I bring that back to my family as well? So that whole thing that CUNY is deciding to put a mental health workshop out there for all of us for the first time. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to bring it to light, because mental health has always been the slow moving, one of the slow moving conditions in terms of acceptance. And I was really glad to hear that. But in my own department, we're human services. So we're all very self-care, social worky, and supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's an example of how something became freer in the organization's like internal dialogue, and it kind of led to a great, like those expanding circles of kind of freedom and well-being. The second part of the question, and we can fold this in if others have thoughts about the first part too, is what recommendations would you all give to organizations or companies that are still experiencing challenges, becoming more wellness oriented?
I would say if your organization doesn't have an EAP, an employee assistance program, really working on establishing one. The people on that are people within your organization who do different things, but you all come together collectively because of your experiences, because of the things you hear, because you're boots to the ground that other people are experiencing and would need support around. Now, the state has like lots of resources for organizations to implement an EAP program, which are free. So they provide you these resources that you can bring forward, and they have lots of other things that you can do. So for example, maybe people are interested in finding out things about their finances. EAP can help you with that. Maybe you're stressed out because you have housing insecurity. EAP can help you with that, because again, all of these resources are kind of housed within this organization. So I would say if you don't have something now, you may want to get one established. And if you do have one established, you may want them to dust off their boots a little bit and maybe revamp, because there's constantly things that are coming that may be helpful to you and your organization, and making sure that they're actually promoting it, because so many people do not even realize they may have an EAP. What does EAP do for you? Like that was something that lots of people that I work with, they're like, really, what do they do? And so they do give you resources. So if you don't want to say go to a therapist or something like that, and you do want to talk to someone, they can find you someone confidentially to talk to that will help you in that moment with your crisis. And so you don't have to suffer alone, and you don't have to bring your colleagues into your stuff, like Justine was saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, EAPs are great. And they also, if you do need to be referred, they'll make sure that it's covered under your health plan. So they're not going to send you somewhere where it's going to be out of pocket. And I agree, a lot of people don't know about EAPs. It's not really advertised. I don't get it advertised in my emails from my employer. And maybe that's something that should be on a regular basis. Hey, by the way, we have this EAP, don't forget, every so often, and what it does, because I don't think enough people know about it. And also it's farmed out, not in your agency, wherever you work, it's farmed out to another place. So it's so confidential.
Mhm. Yeah, and when organizations set up those employee assistance programs, they set it up with confidentiality and kind of separation in mind. Like they want employees to use it. And there would be some doubt about an employee using it if you felt like you were talking with the same coworker who was going to be in your 3 o'clock meeting about your difficulties. So EAPs are not that. They're expressly set up to be different than that. One interesting thing that comes up about the advertising too, I think that I know at organizations that I've worked at, there's been a lot of effort into promoting, they've done good things for employee mental health, and there's been a lot of effort to promote those mental health things. But I think that this is me speaking as a therapist now who talks with individuals a lot. I think that there's something interesting about kind of like the needs of now and the pressures of now. And I can tell you, there are things that have come into my email inbox 1,000 times. And they've been in the stream of emails that always come in, like, that's a thing, I don't know what it said, it goes into and when I need it, that's when I start wondering about what the like, I can have been told about something about 50 times, but I find that I have a different experience when I need it. And so that I think that if one is an employee experiencing a need, sometimes you can do something simple like go back in your own organizational email inbox, and see what you got, because it might not have caught your eye that first time around, but it might be in there for you. And so there are more questions coming in from our audience. We're really excited. If you send them my way, I can read them out. I think they should be coming through soon, but yeah, to that point of, oh, here's one. Hang on, let me read it. So how much can bullying in the workplace contribute to mental health among employees and the workplace culture? Any strategies to help improve workplace cultures? And I think particularly with an eye towards workplace bullying, which is an issue sometimes. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that workplace bullying is a huge issue that would drastically contribute negatively to anyone's mental health. I think it's a really tricky one. And honestly, I've seen more how not to handle it in the workplace than how to handle it. So maybe I can give you an answer on what not to do. And we can extrapolate what to do from there. And so I think the issue is around accountability a little bit. And so it can be really hard to figure out who to report the bullying to, and even harder if the person you report it to doesn't take action. And so I think, practically speaking, the first thing to do is just to document, right, what's gone on in real time. Because often it could be a she said, he said, they said situation, right? And so the more you can document something, write it down, save your email. Unfortunately, you want to have that information to fall back on. Otherwise, I think it can later be construed as like a personal issue that's not legitimate. I think you can also think about how bullying translates into like tangible outcomes. So how are people being assigned work or not being assigned work? I think that's a really tangible way to demonstrate bullying. So are there certain groups in the office that are being given sort of glamour projects versus sort of the more back of the house projects? Are there certain people that are being singled out either for like unpleasant projects? Are there people who conversely are consistently getting sort of the more exciting work? So to the extent that you can really translate bullying into sort of tangible outcomes that you can point to, I think that's sort of like the first step in thinking about that. And then I think, it's hard to confront your bully, right? But if you can find sort of the confidence and grace to do that, I think starting with a conversation in a calm moment, not when the bullying is happening, can be another strategy. It might not work, but if you can speak with someone calmly, not in the heat of the moment, I think that can help as well.
There's a thing that, when someone wants to be assertive, it's called the when I feel because exercise. It's when you said blah, blah, blah to me, I felt hurt, uncomfortable, annoyed, because I use the I word, because I here am a worker and I want to be comfortable in my work environment. So it's like, that telling, and I agree, it's really hard to sit down with the bully, because sometimes a bully could be like teasing the person or making smirks or whatever, excluding them. And this could be going on for a long time. And sometimes it's hard to like, okay, when I'm gonna have to now sit down with the bully after they've done it to me 50 times. And then sometimes, other workers like get on the bandwagon too. And also sometimes the person, not in all cases, but there's sometimes the person that's been bullied may have been bullied all their life because of their unique, wonderful personality or whatever it is that people can't accept as is. And so a lot of times a bully, may feel that they've been living like this all along and not do anything. I really encourage the discussion again with that person individually. And if that doesn't work, then I think a threesome needs to be done with the supervisor, the person, and it has to be done. When that gets done, that 3-person and that bully is exposed, because they don't want to be exposed, right? And they're, I talked to you this, but now I'm the supervisor. We need to get someone else involved in here, whoever that might be, especially if it's also discrimination, then HR, and also Title IX, harassment, sexual harassment, those things are violations that have to be reported.
I would say if it is your supervisor, really kind of figuring out who that next person is. There definitely are instances where your supervisor may be the bully, and they may be also the ringleader in the bullying. So if it is your supervisor, really who is above your supervisor, that you can speak with. And sometimes it is really talking to someone else in your organization that's not connected, say, directly to you and your team, who can provide some perspective or even some suggestions. Definitely, I know when I started my nursing career, there was a senior nurse. She was not the nicest, but it was having other nurses, who are not like that, who really provided me some like concrete ideas and support to work through that experience. So yes, it could be, and this person who was doing the bullying, she was kind of like nurse manager, so it was really hard. And so really having someone removed from the situation, really providing perspective to make sure that I indeed was not crazy, and this really was what was happening, and then helping me to work through the situation was really helpful.
Thank you. So helpful answers about bullying. We have 5 more minutes in this lovely, lovely conversation that we've had this evening. Thank you all. And I'm going to pose one more. It's a lightning round question from our audience, and it's a huge question, but we're going to try to lightning round it anyway, because I really want to hear what you each have to say, because I think it's kind of like the big one of work questions in a way. How do we find meaning in work? And how do we find meaningful work? And I have a feeling that even this lightning round, you all will each have something to say about this. Maybe we can start. Melissa, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
I think work is tricky. There are times when I feel like you may love your job, and there are times where I think, today's just not that day. But it's really kind of checking into why you're doing what it is that you're doing, which is really like the North Star that I stick to, because there are days I'd rather stay in bed and power nap, like Justine says. But at the end of the day, what am I doing and why am I doing it for? And when I keep that in mind, that really helps me staying content at work, because the grass sometimes really is not greener on that other side. So I'm trying to balance that with all the other things that are going on.
Yeah, so connecting with that big why, the big why we do it. Yeah. Sophie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think finding purpose is really important. I think if you can't find purpose, right, if you're doing a job because it's a means to an end and you don't have an option, right, to find that sort of dream fulfilling career. I think thinking about what you can extract from that experience from a skill building perspective to position you for the next role is one way to get excited about what you're doing. So yeah, trying to get as much as you can from an experience, even if it's not the optimal experience, so that you're positioning yourself to get the next opportunity, which may be more satisfying and more fulfilling. But I think at the end of the day, purpose is the answer for me as well.
Yeah. And Justine, how about you?
I think for me, meaning in work is, I always feel like I'm a student, thank God. Because I just, I learned to do another form. I learned to do another proposal. I'm still learning, and I've been in this profession for a long time. So there's always that student part. And if I keep it that attitude, rather than I'm the grunt worker, it gives me that. But the other thing that also, I also feel I look for gratitude. I've come this far. I've got, think about it. We all got college degrees. I'm the first one in my family, and I'm sure a lot of others. So it's like coming this far, and this legacy of our ancestors really gives me a lot of motivation, believe it or not. And also spirituality. I always feel that gratitude, spirituality, why am I doing this work? I mean, I have a lucky thing. I'm really doing, I'm in the helping profession. So, and it is a calling because, we don't make a lot of money. So I think that calling, there has to be that spiritual base. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about that higher power, that giving to community, giving to others. What am I getting in the relationship that I'm having with my coworker, the client that I'm dealing with? When I build those relationships, that's what feeds me. And that to me is just very spiritual when I have connections with people, when I'm doing work, whether they're new or, or people I've known already. So that I kind of keep in mind too. I always try to find the spirituality in some of the stuff.
As you all speak about that question of meaning and finding meaning, each of your answers, sounds so rooted in something experiential. Like what does your day feel like, and where in your day can you find your connection points to the reasons why we feel like we're here doing all this, for our families, for ourselves, for our friend, whatever that is, that real rootedness and experiential rootedness and connectedness to the big question of why. I feel like that question about meaning and work is kind of a lovely place to conclude things for this evening. I want to thank you each again for sharing your perspectives with us. It's just been so helpful and lovely to have this conversation with you all. Thank you also to our audience for your thoughtful questions. I hope you all, audience, enjoyed this discussion this evening and are able to walk away with some important self-care tips. So this concludes our event. Thank you so much for attending, and please stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Thank you, speakers, and thank you, audience. Have a great night.